2025. We want to make sure we are being as inclusive as possible and making sure that the lived experiences, in this case, of lesbian women, of trans women and non-binary people are being heard. And so this is the first event that we've held specifically with lesbian women in mind. And we're very excited to have a variety of people here today. I'm just going to hand over to Yassine Senghor, who is going to chair today and has been engaged with our Inclusive Rail campaign in different ways since the beginning. So thank you, Yassine, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciative to be here today. I have engaged with TSSA in various ways previously. I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant, and I have expertise in LGBT inclusion, but also I look at diversity and inclusion more broadly as well. And I've supported TSSA in various ways with the Inclusive Rail commitment. And yeah, I'm just really excited today. I think this is a really important initiative. We definitely don't see enough of lesbian voices and hear our stories, and particularly in this context, I think it's really, really important. Yeah, I'm also really grateful to our two guests today who have given up the time to share their experiences. And I'm just really excited about the conversation that we're going to have. So I'm joined today by Lauren Cooper-Hayes, who's a senior infrastructure controller and a TSSA member and a role model for the Inclusive Rail campaign. And also joined by Laila El-Matoui, who is the founder of Pride in Education and is an equity and belonging consultant, and was also the Stonewall Lesbian Role Model of the Year 2020. So welcome both of you. Thank you so much. So yeah, I've done a little bit of a brief introduction to the both of you, but I also want to give you a bit of space to tell us about who you are. So you want to talk about your role, your work, a little bit about yourself, and then how do you identify? And let's start with Laila.
Thank you very much, Yassine, and thank you to TSSA for organizing this event. So my name is Laila and my pronouns are she, her. I am a cisgender woman, a lesbian, as Yassine mentioned, a Stonewall Lesbian Role Model of the Year, founder of a virtual conference which is looking at LGBTQ plus education, LGBTQ plus inclusion in education, called Pride in Education, and also Educating Out Racism. And I'm currently working as an equity and belonging consultant, supporting the private sector with a more equitable and diversifying their workforce.
Amazing. Lauren?
I am Lauren Cooper-Hayes. I identify as a gay woman. I've worked Railway for 8 years now. I've been involved, as you said, in the campaign. I'm very shy as well.
No worries. Yeah, and I do want to make sure that in this conversation that you're very comfortable. So if there's anything that, yeah, you don't want to answer or prefer just to have a bit of time on, that's absolutely fine. And we'll just go from there. But I just wanted to pick up on the fact that, so Lauren, you've described yourself as a gay woman rather than lesbian. And I think that's quite interesting. And it's something that a lot of people, have feelings about and would also identify in the same way. And so the term lesbian, has some specific connotations that are attached to it. So I was just wondering, what does the term lesbian, or why you define yourself as a gay woman, and how that's impacted your life?
I personally don't like how the word lesbian. I just don't like how it sounds. To me, it doesn't sound a nice word. I prefer gay. I know obviously some women prefer lesbian. Being gay, I think, is quite a positive thing in my life. I wouldn't want to be anything different. Taken a very, very long time to get to this stage, but since accepting myself, it's brilliant. I'd recommend it to anyone, definitely. But yeah, It's just my personal preference. I mean, if someone does call me a lesbian, I don't get offended because that's the terminology that's acceptable, but it's just how I like to refer to myself.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's really completely valid, obviously. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, there's just associations with it, and maybe kind of historically from, like, as you were saying, kind of earlier on in your journey, it might have been something that, yeah, just is a little bit more difficult to come to terms with. But I really do, like, as you said, I would also recommend that everybody give being gay a go, because it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to me personally. Lila, what about you? What does the term lesbian mean to you? How has it impacted your life?
So I'm a bit like Lauren. I used to actually, depending on who I was talking to, I used to call myself gay because I thought gay hasn't got as much stigma as the word lesbian. Mm-hmm. So if I was talking to a heteronormative environment, I'd say I'm gay. But then if I was within my community, I'd say I'm a lesbian, and really proudly. Do you know what I mean? And it's only since actually I got role model of the year from Stonewall as the lesbian that I'm thinking, well, I better own that thing. And it's really interesting how language evolves and how our emotions relate to certain words. So for example, if we look at the word queer, it meant something bizarre and odd. Then it was used as a derogatory term against our community, and now it's been reclaimed. But depending on who you talk to, for example, maybe older people who have experienced victimization with that word, they'd have a different opinion. I think it's okay, you know, and even if you say I'm part of the LGBTQ plus ABCDEFG community, it's also fine. I think you have to do what feels comfortable for you. I didn't used to be comfortable with the word lesbian, but now I am.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important point that you both make about that, like the journey to the term and to becoming comfortable with your own identity and how you define yourself. I think it's incredibly important that today's Ida Hobbit, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia.
Ida Hoblit.
Well, we'll talk about that in a sec, because I think it's, I do want to elaborate on adding the L into it. So firstly, just wanted to touch on the fact that it is this day, and that actually when we're talking about all these identity days that we have throughout the year, what is the importance of continuing to have these really, these days that focus on certain LGBTQ plus identities? And then do you have any stories that you want to share or experiences of how homophobia has impacted your life? So Lila?
There were a lot of questions, so
sorry, I'll do one at a time. Sorry. So yeah, why do you think it's important that we still have these like identity days and days that raise awareness of these issues?
Oh, that's a really good question. You cannot be what you cannot see. So in order for people to identify themselves, there needs to be visibility, and visibility of the L, the G, the B, the T, the I. I mean, people with intersex variations are often omitted from the equation, which is getting better, but not as much as. So when I look at the acronym, there's a lot of visibility around gay man and lesbians, and then bi and trans people less, and then intersex. It's like, oh, you know, and asexual and all the others, gender expression and identities. So yeah, visibility is absolutely crucial. And then the other question, was it around Ida Hoblit? So why it's important to have the L. This year, the theme for Ida Hoblit is together, resisting, supporting, and healing. And under the word together, I think lesbians have been key and instrumental in the fight for the LGBTQ plus movements. So it started off in 2004 as Idaho, and then it became Ida Hobbit in 2014. And I think 2021 is the year to put the L in Ida Hoblit so that lesbians are included, because we were there at the start, and it's been, you know, and we'll still continue to fight. There is a massive, lesbian erasure is a thing, and Black lesbian erasure is also a thing. So yeah, I think it's very important, and visibility and having a voice helps acceptance.
Thank you. Absolutely agree. And also there's a very specific and nuanced experience that lesbian and gay women face, particularly that relates to things like misogyny and homophobia. So it's quite important to recognize that specific experience. Lauren, what are your thoughts around why these identity days are important?
They are 100% important. I feel the more of it, when I was growing up, I'd never heard of days like this. There wasn't stuff. And when you're trying to come to terms with an identity at a younger age, I feel that if you'd have seen such as this, that it'd have been easier to come out, you know, there is a community out there. This is a normal, I don't like to use the word normal, but like a normal thing to be part of. That this is society is made up of all different types of people, all colours, sexualities, pronouns, whatever you want to be, it's fine. And I think that's the message that we just need to, I'd like to hope in the future that we don't need these days, because it's just accepted that who you are is what you are. And you don't need to, you know, be fighting for stuff, you know, fighting just for the rights that, I mean, heterosexual people have. I mean, that's why visibility is important, definitely.
Brilliant, yeah. I very fully agree with both of you. Like, if I actually, it's only when I started really working in diversity and inclusion that I became very aware of these days, and I didn't really see them that often in like being celebrated and being talked about in a lot of other workplaces and environments that I'd been in. And I completely agree. It would have made such a massive difference to know that, like, if I was in a workplace and they were celebrating or doing an event for it, it would make me feel really welcome in that space, and like I could be myself a bit more. And so I'm just really encouraged to see that it is something that is gaining a lot more recognition and visibility, and that it's drawing attention to our causes and our experiences as well. And then specifically touching on what you were saying. Yeah, Lila, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point, that there is a danger in tokenism. So it's like, oh, it's LGBT History Month, we've ticked that box, we celebrate it, let's forget about it. Yeah. Oh, it's Lesbian Visibility Week, right, we've ticked the lesbian box and stuff. And I think visibility can only work if we make sure that there is a serious commitment from the organizations or the people and institutions celebrating those days to actually have a drive towards inclusion and equity.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, that we really need to make sure that it's a starting point, and it opens up the conversation, but that it's not enough to just be doing things on those days, and to make sure that, you know, this is a year-round commitment, that it really embeds into every layer of an organization and of our communities generally, you know, that we're talking about these things all the time, and all these the issues and the experiences all the time, and that these days are just to highlight them, but it's not enough just to do something on these days, or just to focus on these days and think that's enough. Absolutely agree. So I was interested to know, because like obviously we you know, I'm sure we'll have experiences of homophobia and lesbophobia in the wider world. And, you know, if you want to share about that, I'd be really welcome to it, but there's no pressure. But actually, I'm also quite interested in any experiences of lesbophobia that you face from within the LGBTQIA community. Because I think sometimes people assume that it is just like one big happy family and we are just all together. But actually, I think we know, and I personally know that, you know, that isn't necessarily always the case. So, Lauren, do you have any experiences of lesbophobia within the LGBTQIA community?
Not personally, but I am aware that it does go on between different identities in the lesbian community, but I've not personally suffered any lesbophobia from our community. But I am aware that it goes on.
How about from without, like, outside of the wider community, that, like, and again, you know, only share what you're comfortable to share?
Yeah, I've suffered homophobia from the outer community. I've got an Asian partner, and with that because of their culture and religions that's often associated with an Asian community, there is sort of ongoing issues within my personal life because my partner can't be out fully, if that makes sense. So as a result, we sort of suffer as a couple because their community is quite judgmental. So that's something that we're dealing with at the moment. But I've not faced any homophobia from my community, but I think it's because I don't come across as a stereotypical lesbian, and I think that's where your homophobia comes from. A stereotypical lesbian, you know, like maybe a butcher lesbian, would suffer a lot more than I have, because I don't think you'd necessarily associate me with being a lesbian either.
Thank you for sharing. And I agree. Like, I think I am somebody who is like a virtual masculine of center woman, and yeah, like a lot of the homophobia that I've experienced is very much based on people's perceptions and what the assumptions and the stereotypes that they attach to you based on your identity or what they think your identity is. Lila, can I ask you then, have you faced any lesbophobia that you'd want to share about, both from within the LGBTQIA community or beyond?
I think Lauren made a really important point about microaggressions. So sometimes discrimination is on a spectrum from complete hate to complete acceptance, you know, and for me, as I'm quite femme, I get invisibilized within my community and outside my community. So I've had things say to me like, oh my God, you're too pretty to be a lesbian. On a regular basis, which is very hurtful because it's assuming that lesbians are ugly, or you don't look like a lesbian. I don't know whether you've had that said to you, Lauren.
Yeah.
So when we femme presenting, I think there is an assumption that we are heteronormative, which is not true, which can be just as hurtful as being blatantly called whatever. And it's been really interesting. If I'm by myself, that's fine. But if I'm with a partner who's a bit more masculine looking, then yeah, I've had people shouting all sorts of abuse just for holding my partner's hand in the street. Yeah. So there's different forms of lesbophobias depending on how you're portraying, and there's different form of discrimination from microaggression where the person is unintentionally saying something. It doesn't mean that it's not hurtful, but yeah, it's not very much discussed. And I also want to talk about lesbophobia in countries where it's illegal and where it's punishable by death. So the kind of discrimination that women faced for being lesbian or bi in countries where it's illegal, and trigger warning here if somebody doesn't feel comfortable, but they can be raped or forced to marry a man just to cure them from their lesbianism, for their homosexuality. So yeah, so it's quite a complex issue. Does that answer your question, Yassine?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, because it does raise this wider point as well, is that the issues that lesbian and queer women face across the world are compounded by the fact that they are women, can be compounded by the race, and like your community expectations, as Lauren, you were saying, and it also by things like class and by the community expectation, and so yeah, there are these like additional layers to it that, depending on where you are, and like what your background is, what your community is, and so I think it's really important that we don't forget that as well when we are having these conversations. I think it ties into what you were saying, Lila, around Ida Hoblit, and why it's important that we recognize the L, because of those very specific experiences that queer women and women who are attracted to women will experience, that is completely linked in to the fact that they are women and these other elements as well.
But sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish between misogyny, sexism, racism, and lesbophobia. Do you know what I mean? It's like if somebody's being discriminatory against me, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm a woman of color? Is it because I'm a lesbian? And sometimes it's difficult to know when one starts and the other one stops. Do you know what I mean? I'm privileged in the sense that I am able-bodied, but I would have thought that people who have a visible disability could also be on the, well, everyone with a disability is stigmatized in the wider society. So it's really interesting. I think we need to bring in the intersectional element of lesbophobia, and that it is perceived differently depending on your power and privilege.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's such a vital point. It's impossible, I think, to distinguish sometimes where the discrimination, like what the root of it is, which one it is. And that's why it makes it difficult sometimes to talk about these things, because people are often looking for it to be one thing or the other thing. And it's like, actually, no, it might be a combination of many of these things. And as you're saying, if somebody wants to be, is being discriminatory against you, it's not often that they're breaking it down into their head, like what part of it or what is it specifically about you that they hate. They just hate you. They hate your existence. And yeah, so that's a very interesting point. And I think it's essential that we are conscious of how these intersecting identities will impact how you, like what lesbophobia might feel like and how it might present, how it might affect people. You mentioned something around privilege and being kind of aware of certain privileges that you've had, and I wanted to explore that a little bit further. So do you think that there's any privilege that you have as a lesbian, and maybe actually that might relate to other parts of your identity as well, so like you said, being able-bodied, but is there any situations where being lesbian has maybe benefited you, or are there any privileges around it? Lauren?
I work in a very male-dominated environment. There's only one other female that work in my section. I definitely feel being a lesbian has been positive. I think they see me as sort of as one of the guys, so they include me in a lot of stuff. They talk to me the same as they would a guy. I mean, some people might find that offensive, but I don't. I kind of like it, but I do think it has worked in my benefit, being in a male environment, being a lesbian. Definitely.
That's a really interesting perspective. And I think it's something that I touched upon in a conversation I was having with Nadine at a different point. But yeah, like that thing about guys, like not really, and I get this quite a lot, especially I think being a like a bit more masculine presenting, I think men tend to not quite know how to engage with me, and so they very often will be a bit like, okay, let's be like just treat you like one of the guys, one of the fellas, and sometimes it's like, okay, this is quite nice and this is fun and interesting, and then sometimes it gets a little bit like, oh, say we're gonna, like, I don't know, talk about women, for example, in the same way that we would with the guys. And it's like, actually, no, you're still being quite like misogynistic and stuff. And that's not necessarily like, I'm not gonna stand for that just because, you know, I'm being treated like one of the guys. But it's quite an interesting thing, and an interesting way that people like try and relate to you, because like I think often people are not sure how to engage with lesbians. It's a bit like, I'm just a person, it's fine, just treat me like anyone else. But yeah, that's quite interesting that you've experienced that and that it's been a bit of a positive in that way for you. Lila, what are your thoughts? I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the concept of meritocracy? So you have an affinity with people that you can identify with. So if I'm in an environment where there's a lot of LGBTQ plus people or a lot of lesbians, I feel like I can be my authentic self. But if I'm in an environment where it's very heteronormative, and you hear, because the representation of lesbians traditionally is in pornography, and two women together are to titillate sexual arousal in men. So I have not felt comfortable in environments where these stereotypes were being brought up, and having microaggressions such like but you haven't met the right man to give it to you, or, you know, that kind of stuff, which are very, very offensive, have not been to my advantage in the workplace, and it has happened less and less as visibility arises, and also being femme, you know, and it's about, again, historically and traditionally, lesbians have been invisibilized, from Queen Victoria, who didn't think that we existed, or from the heteronormative world that thinks that we're just there to provide, you know, arousal for heterosexual men. Do you know what I mean? So being an advantage, it's very much depending on where you are. I think if you're working for an LGBTQ organization, which I am at the moment, I've got one of my clients, IG Work, and it's a completely LGBT company. I feel like being a lesbian is to my advantage because I associate with that community, whereas working in other places where I was literally standing out like a sore thumb hasn't been to my advantage. So I think context is everything, is what I was trying to say.
Ask you a question. You know when you get them comments, because we've all had them comments, you know, you haven't met the right man. Do you challenge them there and then?
Oh yeah, completely.
And what do they say? Like, I mean, what sort of person asks that question? Are they inappropriate anyway, just in general? Because I feel that's quite an inappropriate question to ask.
But then our community gets asked a lot of inappropriate questions all the time. When did you come out? What do you mean? When did I come out to myself? When did I come out to my mother? When did I come out to my manager? We constantly make a choice to out ourselves or not, depending on how safe we are. But you wouldn't go to a straight person and say, when did you know you were straight? When did you come out? Like, I feel like some of the questions that people ask us are really inappropriate. And sometimes they don't even realize they're asking us inappropriate questions. It's either like curiosity or ignorance, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like I think that's an interesting point. Like, you know, I know that trans people get it like to a really kind of gross degree as well, like, but people having the sense of like they have a right to know things about you and know things about your life. And I know that a lot of the time it is genuine curiosity, but it's kind of just this assumption that, like, yeah, well, you're a bit different, so like tell me more about you, tell me like all these intimate things. And sometimes that can just be a bit like, would you ask anybody else this? Why do you think it's appropriate or acceptable just because of my you know, sexuality?
Another one that we get is, which one is the man? It's just like, sorry, Lauren?
Really offensive, that one.
Yeah, and I go, well, you wouldn't ask two chopsticks which one is the fork and which one is the knife, because that's two chopsticks. Do you know what I mean? So yes, you cannot be compared. You're right about trans people, Yassine, actually, especially around their genitalia, pre-op, post-op. People want to know, you know, and I think it's really inappropriate. I think it very much also depends where you are, where you live, how much exposure. It's not one size t-shirt fits all, but our community regularly gets asked inappropriate questions. There's videos on YouTube and TikTok just about that topic.
And I think it's adding to that, it's a point that Lauren raised about, I guess, like, is it even safe when somebody's asking you that? Like, who's asking you that? Like, you don't know what their intentions are. And so you're kind of like, you always have to be doing this quick thinking of, you know, can I just, you know, shut him down and, you know, in not so polite language and stuff, or would that potentially put me in more danger? Would that put me in a more difficult situation? So it's this constant trying to having to think like, okay, what could be maybe the worst case scenario here, and what should my responses be, what should my actions be to keep myself safe? So it's incredibly tiring, and it's incredibly difficult when faced with things like that. Absolutely. We've got a comment from the audience that I think touches on something you were saying just now, Lila, around the quote is, "I am proud to be a lesbian. We have a history to be proud of and a rich culture, and that's a way to challenge against lesbophobia." And I think it's it's a powerful statement. It's a really strong statement, and it kind of ties into what we've both been saying around, this journey that you've been on to understand and accept your identity, and be proud of it, and so it's the best thing that's ever happened to you. And so kind of it ties to what you're saying a bit, Lila, around historically, and the fact that lesbians have been at the forefront of a lot of these movements and a lot of these fights and things. So I just wondered if you had anything further to add to that comment. So I'm proud to be a lesbian. We have a history to be proud of and a rich culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of in the UK, there's a couple of shows. So there was It's a Sin on television that was looking at the AIDS pandemic in the 80s, and there's a new show that's coming up called Cruise. It's a one-man show that's coming. I think it's on Thursday, and it tends to be that. Especially with It's a Sin, there wasn't much representation of lesbians yet. There were lesbian nurses, lesbian doctors who supported, the community. So it's always like, we always come as an afterthought. I very much feel like it's white gay men who are leading, and then I go, what about us? I was like, oh yes, there were lesbians there as well. But it's changing. I mean, someone like Norina Shopland is got a book called Cross-Dressing from Women Who Wear Men's Clothing, From Cross-Dressing to Empowerment, which is a historical review of women dressing in men's clothes. And yes, sometimes they were lesbians, but other times they were not. It was just women who needed to wear men's clothes because after the war they needed to go and work. It's very difficult to find traces of our history when we were illegal. So if you look at the past, and we were not allowed, it was all hush hush. So if you look at what was in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, to find evidence of our existence, you really need to dig deep. You need to look at things like, for example, wills. So for example, you've got two women living together, and then her dying wish is for everyone to go to her flatmate, then there's a strong possibility that they might have been in a relationship, but it's not very well documented, and that's why it's hot. So when you say we have a rich history, I say yes, but in terms of it being documented, and obviously the impact of Section 28 in the UK, where we were illegal in libraries, museums, as well as schools, has made representation of our community a lot harder. And you always find that it's like gay men are being represented, and then as an afterthought, the lesbian, the bis, and the trans, and the intersex are like completely forgotten.
Lauren, did you have any thoughts about how discovering histories, or the fact of just that there are other lesbians and that we've existed in various ways throughout history, and even now, having these conversations? Do you have any thoughts on the importance of that and how that can be used as a way to challenge lesbophobia?
I think women's history just wasn't reported on. Women didn't have, they weren't allowed to read, they weren't allowed to write. So I think that we'll always, just being a woman, you're always going to find history hard to find, not just our community. I do think it's important. Obviously, the most famous one would be the one in the Lesbos Island. That's where the name derives from. Obviously, we are aware of history, but I do feel we need to move on. We need to go, not look back, because that's what we're doing these events for, to move forward, not to say, look, this is how we was treated or how we're being treated. We're pushing forward.
I'm not sure I would agree. I think we need to understand our past in order to look at our present so that we can move forward. I think past is really important. Understanding our history and what we've experienced enables us to see what the state of play is today so that we can move forward. I think history and the past is important. It's not what we should focus on, but it should definitely not be forgotten. I think it's gone better in the 20th century, where we've got a lot more lesbians visible in the press, media, actors, singers, and also it's a generational thing.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Lauren, do you wanna?
I do agree, but I don't think we should get too lost in the past. You know, there's got to be a point where you say, you know, that this is what's happened. Yeah, it's bad for our community, but how many times does it need to be brought up? We're about today and what we're living in and what we're experiencing, not in the past.
So I think what we're kind of can say is that we need to learn from the past and then really consider what our next steps are. What are we doing to make sure that things are different moving forward, and how we can continue to keep pushing. Especially now that, you know, like in Western societies, we are at a place where, you know, we have, like you said, like all these role models in different ways and in different mediums as well, you know, so kind of whatever you're into, there's still a lot of work to be done, but you can find a few role models here and there. You can find people who are like you, and you can see that, you know, they are successful and living happy lives and things like that. And so I think it's like about learning from what's happened, and looking ahead as well.
Yeah, and understanding what worked and what didn't work. How did we fight for equality? What were the useful strategies that we used? How can we ban conversion therapy today? Do you know what I mean? Is there any example in the past of something where people were trying to influence change and was successful? What can we learn from that to apply for today?
Isn't the Queen banning it?
No, they're having a consultation. I mean, I think there's nothing to be consulting about. It's cruel, barbaric. It's detrimental to mental health. There's no consultation to be had at all whatsoever. There's a petition going around at the moment. It should be banned. I don't know why we need to consult and who we need to consult. It's detrimental to people's mental health. Why would you want to force someone on religious or beliefs on the grounds that you don't agree with them? I think it's the difference between accept and agree. You know, you don't have to agree with my sexual orientation, but you have to accept I've always been here and we will always be here.
So I think let's focus a little bit on both of you are role models, and I think that's, you know, really impressive and really it does take a lot to kind of stand up and say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, in front of, you know, your workplaces, in front of within your sector, your field, in a place where colleagues and other people, for example, within the rail network, will kind of see you, and that's really bold and impressive. So congratulations to both of you. Well done. And I just wanted to explore then, so why do we need role models? And then what does being a role model mean to you? Lauren?
I'm a role model because I want visibility. I want people to feel that it's okay to be who you are at work and not feel that they have to hide who they are at work. I think if they can, everybody knows anyway in my company, you know, I'm quite open. It's quite, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only lesbian in the office. But I'd want people to come forward to be able to speak to me if they are suffering homophobia or anything else, that I can take that forward for them and make them feel that it's normal, it's okay. Be out, be proud, because it's a gift, really.
It is a gift, yeah. I love that.
It really is. It's a gift. Yeah. Like when you're growing up and stuff, you don't really realise because of society. You know, society portrays this as a man, a woman, 2 kids and a dog in a detached house sort of view. But, you know, once you accept who you are, I feel it changes your views on homophobia and stuff that you might, I feel when you're not out, you might take things than when you are out. If that makes sense. If maybe there is a joke or a bit of banter that's a little bit inappropriate, you might take it more offensively if you were in the closet than when you're out. I don't know if it might just be me, but I just feel the acceptance has to come within first, and that's why I'm a role model. So people hopefully can accept who they are and be open.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a really important point. I do get what you're saying, and I feel you on that. That it's once you have that acceptance of yourself, then what other people think and what other people say, like, it doesn't have as much weight. And sometimes I know that, you know, it's not always, especially if someone's trying to enact like violence on you, that's slightly different. But in terms of like the day-to-day, like people and their opinions, it just doesn't matter as much when you can just come to terms with that yourself and who you are and how you're going to live your life, and you know, can be proud of that. And thank you. There was something else that you'd said as well about there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with it. So it's like you're saying, when you stand up as a role model, that you're a champion for other people as well. So if they're having issues, if they need support, that you're there to stand on their behalf. I think that's really amazing.
We're stronger, aren't we?
Lila, what are your thoughts on why do we need role models and what does it mean to you?
Similar to what I said earlier about visibility, you cannot be what you cannot see. The fact that I have an Arabic sounding name meant that all of a sudden people from the MENA region, which is Middle East and North Africa, had someone that they could see themselves into. And after I won the Stonewall Award, I got contacted by people from all over the world saying, oh my God, we're so proud of you. Thank you. Because, you know, it gives them, and also it's like, if I can make it, so can you. I think it gives people hope. When you see Black people in LGBTQ plus Black people or Asian people that have made it, that have succeeded, you go, yeah, that could be me too. I think it's really important to have visibility. In terms of role model, I felt quite pressurized after I got the award because I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm now going to be scrutinized. So I need to be careful and watch what I say and what I do to a certain extent, because you're almost kind of sort of like representing the community. So it gives you like that added level of responsibility, you know. But role models are really important, and super diverse role models, because, you know, there you can have like a role model which is just basically emulating a particular community. So the diversity within role modeling, whether it's, you know, sexual orientation, gender identity, able-bodied, color, is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both, and thank you for raising the points around like the importance of diversity and the importance of like literally what it means to see somebody who has from a similar background or with a name that you can relate to, and that isn't just some of the images that I guess we've seen like that are presented to us in media for a long time growing up was just, you know, this one certain image of gay white men, and usually, you know, it's either as like the butt of the joke or the comic relief and things. So it's like very difficult to, and even though those people were incredible doing what they did in their own right, but you know, it's very difficult to kind of see yourself represented and to feel that your identity is taken seriously in the world. So I think it's really amazing to see people from across different walks of life, from different backgrounds, standing up and being very proud and being visible and saying, yeah, like I've made it, I've made it being true to myself as well. So I was just wondering, Lauren, I think relating to something you'd said, and how comfortable you are being out of work now. Has that always been the case? Have you always been able to be out and quite confident about being out and like at any workplace?
No, I was at work. At first, I wanted personal and home life separate. So I would get questions, oh, have you got a boyfriend, etc., etc., and I'd just, you know, just sort of bounce them back without really answering the question. And at the time, someone I worked with's daughter worked with my partner, because our company at the time had a very unusual name. You know, it's not a company that most people would work for. Found out, and I went to him and I said, look, I'm not ready. I don't want people knowing this. But he did actually out me at work. Now, it was kind of strange because a lot of people didn't mention anything, but the odd person did just come up and actually just say, look, are you a lesbian? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. That is who I am. And then I started becoming more comfortable. It was my own sort of prejudice, how I thought they would react. I was quite surprised because they are really good at my workplace. They're really accepting. And it was my own fear of how I'd be judged and how I'd look different. And actually, they were all right. I'm quite lucky, I think, where I work. Because I don't suffer the homophobia or the abuse that other lesbians or gays would suffer. So, I'm quite lucky in that aspect.
I think that's really an excellent point, though, of like that fear that you have, that internalized fear of what's going to happen, how are people going to react to this, and like the pressure and the weight that you carry, trying to like maybe not hide it, but not actively, just kind of being conscious and aware of, are people talking about me? Have I said something? Have I said the wrong thing? Have I let something slip that I, wasn't ready to or didn't want to? So yeah, there's so much pressure there, and I'm sorry you went through that experience, somebody outing you when you weren't ready to as well. But I'm glad that it didn't go as badly as expected. But still, it's I can imagine it was quite stressful at the time. What about you, Lila? Have you always been pretty confident and comfortable being out?
No, I think it's been a journey. First of all, coming to terms with my own sexual orientation before you could, and then making sure that my immediate entourage, if you want, was accepting, and then it's a process. But I think if you look at, you're talking about in the workplace, I think if you look at the statistics, I think it's 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus workers have been harassed or bullied at work. 1 in 3 trans person have had their trans status disclosed against their will at work. I'm looking at the latest statistics. And 2 out of 3 LGBTQ plus employees heard lesbian and gay jokes at work. And 2 out of 5 heard bisexual jokes and transgender work. So, as I said, context is everything. So if you're in a workplace where there is a drive from senior management to kind of sort of like be supportive and inclusive, it'll enable you to feel more comfortable to be your authentic place. But if you're in a place where you're on the receiving end of microaggressions and hearing joke all the time, then it'll be a lot harder for you to come out.
Absolutely. It ties into everything that we've been saying, I think, about what inclusive spaces actually look like, and that can go across the board of whatever your identity is. But actually, when a space is not safe and not inclusive, and you are hearing this like banter, but it's at the expense of somebody's identity usually, and how are you meant to feel safe in that workplace, how are you meant to feel able to be your true self, and in turn how are you meant to be productive at work, how are you meant to feel safe and comfortable around your colleagues, and be able to make relationships like workplace relationships and things like that. So yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, sorry, go on.
If you haven't got an LGBT staff network, it makes it more difficult because there isn't like an immediate place where you can go to and relate to people. And even within the LGBTQ plus employer resource group or staff network, whichever one they're called, it's often just one particular demographics that's dominant. What is the organization doing, what we were starting talking at the beginning of the conversation around celebration and days, and Ida Hoblit and Lesbian Visibility Day and Trans Day of Remembrance, etc., etc. But then to flip the coin, if you are able to be your authentic self, you're more productive, you've got a stronger sense of loyalty towards your employer, and productivity increases. I mean, I look at my work history in places where I could be myself, when you don't have to worry about what they're going to say because I'm a lesbian, then you don't have to worry about that. And then you can focus on what it is that you get paid to do. And actually, because you feel valued and respected, you tend to go above and beyond what is expected of you. So it's in the employer's interest to foster this really respectful, accepting environment so that people will, I mean, you're not going to stay in a place where you're being discriminated against. You know what I mean? You're either going to take that to the industrial tribunal or you're going to leave, or both, So it's in the employer's interest to foster a welcoming, nurturing, compassionate work environment, and then they'll thrive.
And I think this is a good note to kind of finish my final line of questioning. And then we are open to the audience for some questions, and there's a few coming through at the moment, but if you do have any questions, please start putting them through now, so we've got some time to answer them. But on that note, Lila, what have you got a message for allies, and what's, sorry, I'm going to start again. Have you got a message for allies or specific actions for those wanting to support LGBT colleagues or friends or the community in general? Like any kind of really, they can be tangible, specific things like go out and do now, or just larger scale things that you want to tell allies, like this is what you should be thinking, this is what you should do.
So much. It could start with adding your pronoun to your email signature on your social media to signify that you're an ally to the trans and non-binary community. But also, if you've got a foreign sounding name, you know, have you been misgendered because people thought Yassine was male? Yassine?
Yeah, all the time.
Exactly. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just about gender identities, it's also about race and ethnicity. That's a really, really simple one. Go and support any events that your employees are organizing around LGBTQ plus celebratory event, because I've often heard people say, oh yeah, that's Lesbian Visibility Week, that's not for me, I'm not a lesbian, or Bi Visibility Day, that's not for me, I'm not bisexual, it's for them, you know. So just like showing up and attending, listening to their experience. There's so much. I think we need to have another webinar just on allyship alone. It's about listening, being a good friend, really. What would you do to your mates to be supportive? And if you hear homophobic, transphobic, biphobic, intersexist comments, just challenge, because it's a lot easier to challenge as an ally than it is if you're directly it's a lot easier for me as a cisgender person to stand up for my trans and non-binary colleagues or friends, because it doesn't affect me personally. I'm not triggered. It's a lot easier for white people to stand up to racism because they're not on the receiving end. They haven't experienced it for their entire childhood and adulthood. Does that sound like good tips? So I've 3. Stand up, attend the event, add your pronouns.
Yep. No,
start with that.
Good, like a solid starting point, and I think something that we can all take away and start doing, and without really causing too much more additional, I don't know, weight to our day-to-day lives. Lauren, have you got any tips for allies?
Definitely challenge is the first one. Definitely challenge. Be supportive, wear your flags, wear your rainbow flags, ask us questions, be involved. I'd personally like allies to push for education from juniors. We need more like lesbian, gay education, that normalised. If we can get that support behind us, that'd be great.
I'd just like to pick up on the word normalize. I mean, I know what you mean. I think it's about being usual. I think Sue Saunders, who co-created Schools Out UK and LGBT History Month in the UK, talks about usualizing rather than normalizing, because if we say normalize, it means that some people are normal and some people are not. So it's all about, we are normal, we're just not the norm, which is slightly different. So about usualizing who we are, so it becomes part of every day.
I really like that. No, yeah, to end on from my questions at least, just utilizing us, and like you're saying, Lauren, like educating yourself about the fact that we're here, we exist, we have the same wants, needs, dreams, hopes that everyone else does, and we're just trying to get on and live our lives and be happy. I've got a quick question from the audience, and this is around like we've been talking about lesbophobia and things like that from within the community, but also how there's a bit of alienation of bi and pansexual women and bi lesbians. So the question is, Do you find the erasure and discrimination of women and non-binary, bisexuals and pansexuals by lesbians as something detrimental to the community moving forward? And are there ways you could see for this to be worked through for more acceptance? So it's kind of discrimination from within the lesbian community towards bi and pan people. Lauren, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do think bisexuals are discriminated against, definitely by lesbians. I've seen it on occasions, but we've all just got to remember that it's not just about us, it's about everybody. So we shouldn't be discriminating, because that's what we're fighting against from the heterosexual community. So we shouldn't definitely be doing it in our own community. We should be all standing together.
Definitely, it's about solidarity against the wider, enemy, which is trying to put us all down, isn't it?
Yeah. What are labels on garments? If you look at your jacket, your trousers, your dress, your skirt, your jumper, a label teaches you how to care for that garment. And I think it should be the same for people.
It's beautiful. I really, really like that. It's made me a little bit emotional, actually.
It's all about being compassionate and accepting, labels are there to care. We need to care for each other, especially in this pandemic. Our community has been starved of social activities. I feel like my life has been kidnapped. And yes, everybody hasn't been able to go to the pub, but for the LGBT community, and especially the very, very few women-only spaces that we had, this is a way to strengthen our own identity. And it's been really hard, I think, for our community, especially if they've been stuck in homophobic or transphobic households. So caring, I think, for me, is the only way forward.
Yeah, I think this is what you're both saying, like that. Just, if we've faced, especially if we've as a community have faced discrimination and harassment and phobias and things, how can we turn to other people and then do the same thing back to them? We absolutely need to be opening our arms, being welcoming, standing in solidarity with each other, and just challenging the bigger hatred that is out there against all of us, not finding ways to fight against one another.
Yeah, we're all on a spectrum, from our skin color, from the lightest to the darkest, from our body size, from the thinnest to the biggest, from our sexual orientation and gender identities and expression. It's a spectrum. And the sooner people come to realize that this is part of life and reality, the better society will be. I think the issue comes from ignorance creates fear, and then fear creates ignorance. And we need to just eradicate that and just go, it's about acceptance. Yeah, you don't need to agree with everything, but if we could all accept that we're all on the spectrum, then that's the end of the battle, isn't it?
That we're all a bit different, and that's okay. And we need to make sure there's space for all of us.
Yeah, I'm okay, you're okay, everybody's okay. Let's get on with it.
It's amazing. Right. I don't seem to have any further questions from the audience, and we're actually just hitting our time as well. So I do want to say, both of you, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really just wonderful to be in this space with other lesbian or gay women, and just to talk about our experiences a bit and to share some of the things that we've been through. And I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate you both as role models and the responsibility that is attached to that. It's not an easy role. It's not something that everybody can do. And it is quite an important thing that you are standing up and being visible. And I know that it will have impact on the lives of so many people around who see you. So thank you.
Thank you, Yassine. You've done a fantastic job sharing, keeping the conversation going, you're able to reflect back what we were saying. Thank you to Nadine at TSSA for having this event. I'm genuinely grateful. I think what you're providing for our community in terms of visibility is phenomenal, even if it's just within your workplace. Every little drop makes a river that will lead to the ocean. And Lauren, really lovely meeting you. And thank you very much for being a role model in your organization.
Thank you both. Okay. And I think that's us. Let's end it there.